a killer's promise to keep. Caterina Bellini had always been her father's most dangerous weapon. A strategist. A shadow. But when her family fell, when the throne was left empty, she learned something brutal. She had never been a weapon. She had been leverage. And the man who sat across from her now, the one who had once sworn to ruin her, smiled like he already knew her next move. "You lost, Piccola Regina," he murmured. "Now, the only question is how much are you willing to pay to win?" Chapter 1. The Shattered Throne of the Bellinis. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of the Bellini penthouse, each drop a percussive echo of the turmoil within Caterina Bellini's heart. From this height, the city of Viridia sprawled beneath her, a glittering tapestry of lights blurred by the downpour. It was a city that had once trembled at the mention of her family's name, a city that now whispered of their downfall with a mixture of fear and schadenfreude. 3 months. It had been 3 months since the massacre, since the Bellini Empire had crumbled, leaving her, the once untouchable principessa, teetering on the precipice of oblivion. She wrapped her silk robe tighter around herself, the fabric a cold comfort against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The room was opulent, a testament to the Bellini legacy Murano glass chandeliers, antique furniture that had witnessed generations of power plays, and a priceless collection of Renaissance art that now seemed to mock her with its silent, enduring beauty. It was all a facade, a gilded cage built on blood and betrayal. Caterina walked towards the grand, mahogany desk that had once been her father's, her bare feet sinking into the plush Persian rug. On its surface sat a single, untouched glass of amber liquid, his favorite scotch, a ritual she had continued even after his death. She picked up the heavy crystal tumbler, the ice clinking softly, a fragile sound in the vast silence. The scent of the aged whiskey, rich and smoky, brought a fresh wave of grief, a sharp pang in her chest. Her father, Don Lorenzo Bellini, had been a man of formidable presence, a ruler who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He had groomed her, his only child, to be his successor, teaching her the intricate dance of power, the ruthless logic of the famiglia. But he had also sheltered her, shielding her from the darkest corners of their world. Or so she had believed. The reflection staring back at her from the polished surface of the desk was a stranger. Gone was the confident, almost arrogant glint in her dark eyes. In its place was a haunted vulnerability, a weariness that aged her beyond her 38 years. Her once impeccably styled raven hair now hung loose, framing a face that had grown thinner, the sharp angles of her cheekbones more pronounced. The elegant designer clothes she usually favored had been replaced by simple, comfortable attire, a testament to her shrinking world. A soft chime echoed through the apartment, announcing a visitor. Caterina tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the small, pearl-handled pistol she kept hidden in the desk drawer. Since the massacre, she trusted no one. Every shadow held a potential enemy. Every smile could conceal a dagger. "Signorina Bellini," a voice called out, filtered through the intercom system. It was Marco, her father's most trusted consigliere, the only one who had remained loyal after the fall. "Signor Rossi is here." Rossi.
Alessandro Rossi.
The name sent a shiver of both dread and a strange, unsettling anticipation through her. He was the head of the Rossi family, the Bellini's oldest and most bitter rivals. He was also the man who had orchestrated their downfall, the architect of her current misery. And yet, he was the only one who had offered her a lifeline, a twisted, dangerous bargain that was the sole reason she was still alive. She took a deep breath, composing herself, smoothing down the imaginary wrinkles on her robe. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not to him. Weakness was a luxury the principessa of a fallen empire could not afford. "Let him in, Marco," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing Alessandro Rossi. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the muted light of the hallway, his presence filling the room with a palpable tension. He was taller than she remembered, his broad shoulders straining against the fabric of his impeccably tailored suit. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was slicked back, revealing a face that was both handsome and ruthless. His eyes, the color of cold steel, met hers, and a slow, predatory smile curved his lips. "Katerina," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent an involuntary tremor through her. "It's been too long." He moved with the grace of a predator, his gaze never leaving hers. He stopped in front of the desk, the distance between them a charged battleground. He picked up the glass of scotch, swirling the amber liquid, his eyes studying her over the rim. "Still indulging in your father's vices, I see," he observed, his voice laced with a subtle mockery. "Old habits die hard," Katerina replied, her voice tight. He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "Indeed. Especially when those habits are all that remain of a once great empire." The words were a deliberate jab, a reminder of her fallen status. But Katerina refused to be baited. She had learned to mask her emotions, to present a facade of icy composure, a skill honed over years of navigating the treacherous waters of mafia politics. "What do you want, Alessandro?" she asked, cutting to the chase. His smile widened, a flash of white teeth in the dimly lit room. "Straight to the point, as always." "I admire that about you, Katerina. You were always your father's daughter." He placed the glass back on the desk, the clink echoing in the silence. "I'm here to discuss the terms of our agreement." The agreement. The pact she had made with the devil himself. In exchange for her life, and the lives of the few remaining Bellini loyalists, she had agreed to cede control of her family's remaining assets, their territory, their influence, everything. It was a complete and utter surrender, a humiliation she had swallowed with gritted teeth. But Alessandro Rossi had not come for what was due. He had stated, the night of the bargain, in a voice thick with cruel amusement, that he looked forward to collecting. She knew what he wanted. He wanted her. Not her body, not in the way most men desired. Alessandro wanted her spirit. To break, utterly and completely, the Bellini pride. "I believe the terms were quite clear," Katerina said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil churning within her. "Everything is yours. What more could you possibly want?" He leaned closer, his scent a mix of expensive cologne and something darker, more primal filling her senses. "Everything?" he whispered, his voice a silken threat. "Are you sure about that, Piccola Regina?" His hand, large and calloused, reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of both fear and something else, something she couldn't, or wouldn't, name, through her. "I don't think I have everything just yet." The air crackled with unspoken tension, the silence punctuated only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the windows. Katerina held his gaze, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, a game she was destined to lose. But she would not go down without a fight. She would not let him see her break. She was, after all, a Bellini. And even in defeat, a Bellini held their head high. But as his steel-gray eyes bore into hers, a flicker of something unexpected passed across his face, a hint of something that looked almost like respect? Or perhaps it was merely the satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. Whatever it was, it sent a new wave of unease washing over her. This was not going to be as straightforward as she had thought. Alessandro Rossi had a plan, and she was just beginning to understand the terrifying depth of his game. The rain continued, each drop an omen. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Fallen Empire. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock in the corner. Katerina held Alessandro's gaze, refusing to be the first to break the silent standoff. His touch, though brief, lingered on her skin, a phantom warmth that both repelled and intrigued her. She was acutely aware of her vulnerability, of the power he wielded over her. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his actions, something hidden beneath the surface of his calculated cruelty. He finally withdrew his hand, the absence of contact leaving a strange void. "You have spirit, Katerina," he said, his voice losing some of its mocking edge. "I'll give you that. But spirit alone won't save you." "I'm not looking to be saved," she retorted, her voice regaining some of its strength. I made a deal. I intend to honor it. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down her spine. A deal made under duress. A deal that stripped you of everything. Do you really think that's the end of it? Katerina stiffened. What are you implying? He moved away from the desk, pacing slowly around the room, his eyes taking in the opulent surroundings. This place, he said, gesturing with a sweep of his hand, it reeks of the past, of faded glory, of a dynasty that is no more. He stopped in front of a large oil painting, a portrait of her father in his prime. Don Lorenzo Bellini stared down from the canvas, his eyes full of the same ruthless determination that Katerina had inherited. Alessandro studied the painting for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. Your father was a formidable man, he said, his voice surprisingly devoid of malice. He built an empire. But empires, Katerina, are built on more than just fear and power. They're built on alliances, on trust, on loyalty. He turned back to her, his gaze piercing. And those are things you no longer possess. Katerina felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. He was right. The Bellini name, once synonymous with power, was now tainted with betrayal. The massacre had not only decimated her family, it had shattered the trust of their allies, leaving them isolated and vulnerable. The city is talking, Alessandro continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They're whispering about the principessa who lost everything. About the woman who made a pact with the devil to save her own skin. Katerina flinched, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She knew the whispers were circulating, the rumors spreading like wildfire through the tightly knit community of the Viridia underworld. She had become a pariah, a symbol of the Bellini's downfall. And what do you say, Alessandro? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, his presence dominating the room. I say, he said, his voice low and intense, that you are a survivor, and that you are more valuable to me alive than dead. The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Katerina searched his face, trying to decipher his true intentions. What game was he playing? What did he really want from her? Valuable how? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent a chill down her spine. You have knowledge, Katerina. Connections. You know the inner workings of your father's empire better than anyone. And that knowledge is power. He reached out and picked up a small, intricately carved wooden box from the desk, a box that Katerina recognized instantly. It was her father's private strongbox, containing his most sensitive documents, his secrets. She had assumed it had been destroyed in the massacre.
How?
She began, her voice choked with surprise. I have my ways, he said, his eyes glinting with amusement. He opened the box, revealing a collection of papers, photographs, and a small, antique key. These, he said, gesturing to the contents, are just a small sample of what you possess. The rest is in your head. Katerina stared at the box, her mind racing. He was offering her a chance, a twisted, dangerous opportunity to reclaim some semblance of power. But at what cost? To work with him, to betray the memory of her father, to become a pawn in his game, it was unthinkable. And yet, the alternative was oblivion. I don't understand, she said, her voice shaking. Why would you want my help? You could have destroyed everything. You could have killed me. He closed the box, the click echoing in the silence. Because, Katerina, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, I have a vision. A vision of a new Viridia. A Viridia where the old rivalries are buried, where the families work together, not against each other. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. And I believe you can help me achieve that vision. He was proposing a unification, a merging of the families, something that had been unheard of in the history of Viridia's mafia. It was a bold, audacious plan, one that could either bring unprecedented stability or plunge the city into all-out war. You're asking me to betray my family, she said, her voice filled with disbelief. I'm asking you to save it, he corrected, his voice firm. The Bellini name is in ruins, Katerina. But it doesn't have to disappear entirely. You can rebuild it. Stronger.
Different.
He placed the strongbox back on the desk, his eyes never leaving hers. But you can't do it alone. He extended his hand, offering her a choice. A choice between a slow, agonizing demise and a dangerous, uncertain future. A choice between clinging to the ghosts of the past and embracing a new, terrifying reality. Katerina stared at his outstretched hand, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, resentment, and a flicker of something else. Hope. It was a dangerous emotion, a treacherous seed planted in the barren soil of her despair. But it was there, nonetheless, a tiny spark refusing to be extinguished. The whispers of the city echoed around her, along with her father's lessons, her own strategic mind at war with the grief that threatened to consume her. Chapter 3. A bargain struck in darkness. The weight of his offer pressed down on Katerina, heavy as the ancient stones of the Bellini ancestral home in the hills overlooking Viridia. Alessandro's hand remained outstretched, a bridge between two warring worlds, two impossible choices. Her mind, trained since childhood in the art of strategy and deception, raced to analyze his motives. He was a predator, yes, but there was a calculated logic to his actions that she couldn't ignore. He could have simply erased the Bellini name from existence. He hadn't. She looked at his hand, the strong, calloused fingers, the subtle glint of a signet ring bearing the Rossi crest, a coiled serpent, poised to strike. It was a symbol of power, of ruthlessness, but also of resilience. The Rossis had endured their own share of trials, their own betrayals. Perhaps, beneath the surface of his ambition, there was a genuine desire for a new order, a new way of doing things. Or perhaps it was all a carefully constructed lie. The silence in the room was broken only by the distant wail of a siren, a reminder of the ever-present dangers of their world. Katerina drew a shaky breath, the scent of the city's rain-washed streets mingling with the lingering aroma of her father's scotch. She had always been a gambler, a risk-taker, trained to assess odds and make calculated decisions. But this was a gamble unlike any she had ever faced. "If I agree," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What are your terms?" His hand didn't waver, his gaze unwavering. "Full cooperation," he said, his voice low and firm. "Access to your knowledge, your connections, your influence." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "And your loyalty." Loyalty. The word hung in the air, a loaded weapon. Loyalty to him? To the man who had destroyed her family? It was a bitter pill to swallow. "Loyalty is earned, Alessandro," she said, her voice regaining some of its steel. "Not demanded." A flicker of respect crossed his face, a subtle acknowledgement of her defiance. "Indeed," he said, "and I intend to earn it." He lowered his hand, but the offer remained, suspended between them like an unspoken pact. "You will have my protection," he continued. "The protection of the Rossi family. No one will dare touch you, or what remains of your people." It was a tempting offer, a shield against the wolves circling her, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But Katerina knew that protection came at a price. She would be bound to him, indebted to him, a puppet dancing to his tune. "And what about the other families?" she asked, her mind already working, analyzing the potential consequences of his plan. "The Ferraras, the Lombardis, they won't take kindly to a Rossi-Bellini alliance." He smiled a slow, knowing smile. "Leave them to me. I have a plan." His confidence was both unsettling and intriguing. He clearly had a strategy, a vision that extended far beyond her immediate concerns. But Katerina was not one to blindly trust, especially not a Rossi. "I need time," she said, her voice firm. "Time to think. Time to assess the situation." He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "You have 24 hours, he said. "But know this, Katerina. Time is a luxury neither of us can afford. The vultures are circling, and they won't wait forever." He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. He paused at the door, looking back at her, his silhouette framed against the muted light of the hallway. "One more thing," he said, his voice low and intense. "There will be conditions." Katerina felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. What kind of conditions? He smiled, a cryptic smile that sent a shiver down her spine. Let's just say I expect you to be accessible. He didn't elaborate, leaving the meaning of his words hanging in the air, a subtle threat veiled in ambiguity. He was testing her, pushing her boundaries, asserting his dominance. He left, the heavy oak doors closing behind him with a resounding thud. Katerina stood alone in the silence, the weight of his offer pressing down on her. She was trapped, cornered, forced to make an impossible choice. She walked over to the window, staring out at the rain-swept city. The lights blurred, forming a shimmering, distorted reflection of her own fractured world. She was caught between the ghosts of the past and the terrifying uncertainty of the future. She closed her eyes, trying to find some semblance of clarity amidst the chaos. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, his lessons, his warnings, his unwavering belief in the Bellini's strength. But his world was gone, shattered beyond repair. She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening with a newfound resolve. She would not be broken. She would not be a victim. She would use Alessandro Rossi, use his ambition, his power, to rebuild, to reclaim what was hers. She would play his game, but she would play it on her own terms. She reached for the phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She needed to talk to Marco, to gather information, to assess the loyalties of the remaining Bellini soldiers. She needed to understand the landscape of the new Viridia, the shifting alliances, the hidden dangers. She dialed Marco's number, her voice steady and firm. "Marco," she said, "we have work to do." As she spoke, a plan began to form in her mind, a dangerous, intricate strategy that would either save her or destroy her completely. She would walk the tightrope between loyalty and betrayal, between love and hate, between the past and the future. She would become the principessa her father had always wanted her to be, but on her own terms. A principessa forged in the fires of adversity, a queen of shadows, a survivor. A storm was gathering outside, but a different kind of storm, a carefully cultivated tempest, was brewing within Katerina. Chapter 4. The Echoes of Betrayal's Past. The following hours were a blur of hushed phone calls, clandestine meetings in dimly lit corners of forgotten trattorias, and the painstaking gathering of fragmented intelligence. Katerina moved through the underbelly of Viridia like a ghost, re-establishing old contacts, assessing the loyalties of former allies, and piecing together the shattered remnants of her father's network. Marco, ever the faithful consigliere, was her anchor in the storm. He had served her father for decades, his loyalty unwavering, his knowledge of the Viridia underworld encyclopedic. He provided her with a steady stream of information, names, faces, whispers of shifting alliances and hidden agendas. "The Ferraras are consolidating their power," Marco reported, his voice low and gravelly, as they sat huddled in a booth at the back of a small, family-run restaurant, the aroma of garlic and oregano filling the air. "They're moving in on our territory, taking advantage of the vacuum." The Ferraras, another powerful family, had always been rivals of the Bellinis, their relationship characterized by a volatile mix of grudging respect and simmering resentment. Katerina had expected them to make a move, but the speed and audacity of their actions were unsettling. "And the Lombardis?" she asked, her fingers tracing the rim of her espresso cup. "They're playing it cautious," Marco replied, his eyes scanning the room, ever watchful for potential threats. "They're waiting to see which way the wind blows." The Lombardis, known for their shrewdness and their vast network of informants, were always the wild card. They were opportunistic, aligning themselves with whoever held the upper hand. Katerina knew she couldn't count on their loyalty, but she also couldn't afford to make them enemies. The information Marco provided painted a grim picture. The Bellini Empire was crumbling, its territories being carved up by rival families, its soldiers defecting or disappearing. The massacre had not only decimated her family, it had shattered the fragile balance of power in Viridia, unleashing a wave of chaos and uncertainty. But amidst the wreckage, Katerina found glimmers of hope. There were still pockets of loyalty, small groups of soldiers who remained faithful to the Bellini name, men who had served her father with unwavering devotion. They were scattered, demoralized, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. One name, in particular, kept surfacing in Marco's reports: Dante Moretti. He had been her father's most trusted enforcer, a man known for his ruthlessness and his unwavering loyalty. He had disappeared after the massacre, presumed dead or in hiding. But Marco had received whispers, rumors of his survival, of his gathering a small band of loyalists in the shadows. "If anyone can help us, it's Dante," Marco said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "But finding him, that's the challenge." Caterina knew that finding Dante was crucial. He was a skilled fighter, a master strategist, and he held the respect of the remaining Bellini soldiers. He was also a link to her past, a reminder of the strength and resilience of her family. As the evening wore on, Caterina's mind raced, analyzing the information, formulating a plan. Alessandro Rossi's offer was a dangerous gamble, but it was also an opportunity. She could use his resources, his protection, to rebuild her power base, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. But she would not be his puppet. She would play his game, but she would play it on her own terms. She would learn his secrets, exploit his weaknesses, and ultimately, turn the tables on him. Before she left the small restaurant, she extracted one final piece of information from Marco: an address. The place where her father and mother used to go, before her mother died. She had not thought about this in years, and the sudden rush of memory made her chest tighten. The next morning, with the deadline of Alessandro's ultimatum looming, Caterina found herself standing in front of a small, unassuming villa nestled in the hills overlooking Viridia. It was a far cry from the opulent Bellini mansion, a place of quiet beauty, surrounded by olive groves and vineyards. The villa had been her mother's sanctuary, a place where she had escaped the pressures of the mafia world, a place where she had cultivated her love of art and music. Caterina had spent countless hours here as a child, surrounded by her mother's gentle warmth and her father's quiet affection. The villa had been abandoned after her mother's death, a painful reminder of a happier past. Caterina had avoided it for years, unable to face the ghosts that haunted its rooms. But now, standing here, she felt a strange sense of peace, a connection to a part of herself that she had long forgotten. The air was fresh and clean, scented with the fragrance of wildflowers and the salty tang of the sea. The sun was warm on her skin, a welcome contrast to the coldness that had settled deep within her. She walked slowly through the overgrown garden, her fingers brushing against the leaves of ancient olive trees. The villa itself was in a state of disrepair, the paint peeling, the shutters hanging loosely. But it still retained a sense of its former beauty, a testament to the enduring power of love and memory. She entered the villa, the silence broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath her feet. The air was cool and musty, filled with the scent of dust and decay. But it was also filled with the echoes of the past, the whispers of laughter, the strains of music, the warmth of her mother's embrace. She wandered through the rooms, each one triggering a flood of memories. The living room, with its grand piano and its walls lined with books. The kitchen, with its large, wooden table and its scent of freshly baked bread. The bedroom, with its faded floral wallpaper and its view of the sea. She found a photograph of her mother, young and beautiful, a smile lighting up her face. Caterina picked it up, her fingers tracing the outline of her mother's face. She had been so young when her mother had died, her memories fragmented and incomplete. But standing here, in this place that had been so dear to her, she felt a renewed sense of connection, a surge of love and longing. It had been a car accident. That's what they told her. Her father, his face a stoic mask, told her mother's vehicle had gone off the road, on a treacherous mountain pass. He'd held Caterina, a small girl still, and had not shed a tear. A sudden, sharp sound made her jump. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She wasn't alone. Her heart pounded in her chest, her senses on high alert. She had been followed.
Alessandro?
One of the Ferraras? Or someone else entirely? She reached for the small pistol she always carried, her hand steady, her mind focused. She moved silently through the villa, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. The creaking came again, closer this time. From her mother's studio, at the end of the hallway. She approached the door, her pistol raised, her finger on the trigger. She took a deep breath and kicked the door open, ready to confront whoever was waiting inside. The scent of oil paint and turpentine hit her, a strong wave of another time, and the room was empty. The window, overlooking the garden, was open. A curtain billowed. Someone had been here, and recently. Chapter 5. Beneath the Veil of Civility. The open window, the lingering scent of turpentine and oil paints, it was a clear sign that her intruder had been familiar with the villa, with her mother's habits. This wasn't a random break-in, it was a deliberate act, a message. But from whom? And what was the message? Katerina carefully examined the studio. It was exactly as she remembered it, a chaotic haven of creativity. Canvases lined the walls, some finished, some half-done, others blank, waiting for inspiration. Brushes of all sizes lay scattered on the table, their bristles still stained with dried paint. Tubes of paint, their caps loosened, lay scattered among sketches and charcoal drawings. Her mother had been a talented artist, her work capturing the beauty of the Viridia landscape, the vibrant colors of the Mediterranean. But she had also been a private person, her art a personal expression, a refuge from the darkness of her husband's world. Katerina picked up a small, unfinished painting, a portrait of a young girl with dark hair and piercing eyes, a portrait of herself as a child. She remembered sitting for it, her mother patiently capturing her likeness, her gentle voice guiding her, encouraging her. A wave of grief washed over her, a sharp pang in her chest. She had lost so much, her family, her home, her innocence. And now, she was being hunted, stalked, forced to play a dangerous game with a man who had destroyed everything she held dear. She placed the painting back on the easel, her gaze drawn to a small, wooden box tucked away in a corner of the room. It was a box she didn't recognize, a simple, unassuming container, its surface unadorned. She hesitated, her instincts telling her to be cautious. But curiosity, a burning need to understand the secrets of her past, overcame her apprehension. She opened the box, revealing a collection of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. The letters were addressed to her mother, in a handwriting she didn't recognize. The return address was simply a post office box in Rome. Katerina carefully untied the ribbon, her fingers trembling slightly. She unfolded the first letter, her eyes scanning the faded ink. The words were in Italian, a formal, elegant script. They spoke of love, of longing, of a secret rendezvous, of a forbidden passion. The letter was signed simply with an initial, A. Katerina's heart pounded in her chest.
Who was A?
And what was his relationship with her mother? The letters hinted at a clandestine affair, a hidden romance that had been kept secret from her father. She read through the rest of the letters, each one revealing more details of the affair, the growing intensity of their love, the risks they were taking. The last letter was dated just a few weeks before her mother's death. It spoke of a plan, a desperate attempt to escape, to start a new life together. Katerina felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. Her mother's death, had it really been an accident? Or had it been something more sinister? Had her father discovered the affair? Had he eliminated her? The thought was horrifying, a betrayal of everything she had believed about her father. He had been a ruthless man, a man capable of violence, but he had also loved her mother in his own way. Or had he? The unanswered questions swirled in her mind, a tempest of doubt and suspicion. She needed answers, she needed to know the truth. She carefully placed the letters back in the box, her mind racing. She needed to find to uncover the secrets of her mother's past. And she needed to do it before Alessandro Rossi discovered what she was up to. She left the villa, the weight of the letters heavy in her pocket. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. The beauty of the surroundings, the peace she had felt earlier, was gone, replaced by a sense of unease, of impending danger. She drove back to the city, her mind replaying the events of the day. The open window, the letters, the whispers of betrayal, it all pointed to a hidden truth, a truth that could shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. She arrived back at the penthouse, the deadline of Alessandro's ultimatum looming. She had made her decision. She would accept his offer, but on her own terms. She would use him, just as he intended to use her. She found him waiting for her in the living room, sipping a glass of scotch, his gaze fixed on the city lights below. He turned as she entered, his eyes assessing her, searching for any sign of weakness. "You took your time," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I had things to consider," she replied, her voice steady and firm. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "And have you reached a decision?" Katerina met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I have," she said. "I accept your offer." His smile widened, a flash of white teeth in the dimly lit room.
"I knew you would," he said.
"You're a survivor, Katerina. Just like me. But I have conditions," she continued, her voice firm. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Conditions?" "I want access to your resources, your information network," she said. "I want to know everything that's happening in Viridia. And I want a guarantee of safety, not just for myself, but for the people who remain loyal to me." He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "Agreed. And one more thing," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to know who killed my mother." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a declaration of war. Alessandro's smile vanished, his eyes hardening. The game had begun, with stakes much higher and far more personal than she had originally thought. The air crackled with the shift. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Gaze, Unwavering. Alessandro's reaction was subtle, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, a flicker of something unreadable in his steel-gray eyes. But Katerina, trained to read the nuances of body language, to decipher the unspoken messages of the mafia world, caught it.
He knew something.
He might not have been directly involved in her mother's death, but he knew more than he was letting on. "Your mother's death was a tragedy," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "A car accident, as I understand it." "That's what everyone was told," Katerina countered, her voice laced with suspicion. "But I have reason to believe otherwise." He took a sip of his scotch, his gaze never leaving hers. "And what reason is that?" Katerina hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She didn't trust him, not completely. But she needed his help, his resources, to uncover the truth. "I found something," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Something that suggests her death might not have been accidental." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of curiosity in his eyes.
"And what is this something?"
Katerina reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, wooden box containing the letters. She placed it on the desk between them, her eyes locked with his. "I found these at my mother's villa," she said. "They're letters. From a man she was involved with." Alessandro's expression remained unchanged, but Katerina sensed a shift in his demeanor, a subtle increase in his attention. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the box. "And what do these letters say?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "They suggest a secret affair," Katerina replied. "A plan to escape, to start a new life together." The last letter was dated just weeks before her death. Alessandro reached for the box, his fingers brushing against hers. A jolt of electricity passed between them, a momentary spark of connection in the midst of their tense standoff. He opened the box, his eyes scanning the letters, his expression unreadable. He read through them quickly, his brow furrowing slightly. He finished the last letter, his gaze returning to Katerina's. "Who is?" he asked, his voice sharp. Katerina shook her head. "I don't know. That's what I need to find out." He closed the box, his gaze lingering on it for a moment. "This changes things," he said, his voice thoughtful. "How so?" Katerina asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "If your mother's death was not an accident," he said, "then it means someone wanted her dead. And that someone might still be out there." The words sent a chill down Katerina's spine. She had known the risks, the dangers of digging up the past. But now, the threat felt more real, more immediate. Who do you think it was? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alessandro shrugged, his expression enigmatic.
It could be anyone, he said.
A jealous lover, a rival family, someone with a grudge against your father. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Or, it could have been your father himself. Katerina flinched, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She had considered the possibility, the horrifying thought that her father might have been responsible for her mother's death. But to hear it from Alessandro, to see the suspicion in his eyes, made it all the more real. My father loved my mother, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Alessandro raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism in his gaze.
Did he?
He asked. Or did he love the idea of her? The perfect wife, the beautiful ornament, the mother of his heir? His words struck a chord, a painful truth that Katerina had tried to ignore. Her father had been a possessive man, a man who valued control above all else. He had loved her mother, yes, but it had been a possessive, controlling love, a love that could easily turn to rage if threatened. I need to know the truth, Katerina said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. I need to find out what happened to my mother. Alessandro nodded, his gaze unwavering.
And I will help you, he said.
But know this, Katerina. The truth can be a dangerous thing. It can shatter illusions, destroy families, unleash forces you cannot control. I'm not afraid of the truth, Katerina replied, her voice strong. I'm afraid of living a lie. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Then let us uncover the truth together, he said. But be warned, Piccola Regina. The path we are about to tread is paved with secrets, lies, and betrayals. And it may lead us to places we never expected to go. He stood up, his presence dominating the room.
Come, he said.
We have work to do. He led her out of the penthouse, into the heart of Viridia's night. The city lights glittered below them, a deceptive facade of beauty and glamour, concealing a world of darkness and danger. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Katerina felt a mixture of fear and excitement. She was stepping into the unknown, embarking on a perilous journey that could either save her or destroy her. But she was not alone. She had Alessandro Rossi by her side, a dangerous ally, a man with his own secrets, his own agenda. She knew she couldn't trust him completely, but she also knew that she needed him. They were bound together by a shared past, a shared ambition, and a shared desire for the truth. They were two sides of the same coin, two predators circling each other, each waiting for an opportunity to strike. The car stopped in front of a nondescript building in a quiet, industrial part of the city. This was one of Alessandro's many hidden headquarters, a place where he conducted his most sensitive business, a place where secrets were revealed and deals were made. It smelled of concrete, oil, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Welcome to my world, Katerina, he said, his voice a low murmur in the darkness. He glanced at her, a strange, almost protective look in his eye. The serpent was showing a different face, and Katerina, despite herself, felt a tremor of something that wasn't fear. It was the beginning of a dangerous alliance, and a promise of revelations. Chapter 7. Scars that time cannot erase. The building's interior was a stark contrast to its nondescript exterior. It was a meticulously organized space, a blend of modern technology and old-world elegance. Sleek computers and encrypted communication devices sat alongside antique furniture and leather-bound books. It was a reflection of Alessandro himself, a man who embraced both the new and the old, a man who valued both efficiency and tradition. Alessandro led Katerina through a series of corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was cool and sterile, a stark contrast to the humid night outside. They passed several closed doors, each one guarded by armed men, their faces impassive, their eyes watchful. This is where I conduct my most private business, Alessandro said, his voice low and confidential. It's secure, discreet, and off the grid. He stopped in front of a large, mahogany door, its surface unadorned. He entered a code on a keypad, and the door clicked open, revealing a spacious, dimly lit office. The room was dominated by a large, antique desk, its surface cluttered with papers, files, and a laptop. A wall of windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars. "Make yourself comfortable," Alessandro said, gesturing towards a leather armchair in front of the desk. Katerina sat down, her gaze taking in the surroundings. The room was both luxurious and functional, a reflection of Alessandro's power and his meticulous attention to detail. He sat down behind the desk, his eyes assessing her. "Now," he said, "let's talk about He opened a file on his laptop, displaying a series of photographs and documents. "I've already started digging," he said. "I have people looking into the post office box in Rome, checking old records, searching for any connection to your mother." Katerina was impressed by his efficiency, his willingness to act quickly. He was clearly taking her seriously, treating her as a partner, not a pawn. "What have you found?" she asked, her voice eager. He tapped on the keyboard, bringing up a photograph on the screen. It was a grainy, black and white image of a man, taken from a distance. The man was tall, with dark hair and a distinguished appearance. He was wearing a suit and tie, and he was carrying a briefcase. "This is the only image we have of anyone collecting mail from that box around the time your mother received those letters," Alessandro said. "It's not much to go on, but it's a start." Katerina studied the photograph, her heart pounding in her chest. The man's face was partially obscured, but there was something familiar about his posture, his build. "Can you enhance the image?" she asked.
Alessandro nodded.
He typed a few commands, and the image sharpened slightly, revealing more details of the man's face. Katerina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She recognized him. It was a younger version of her father's lawyer. The family lawyer, who had been at her father's side for many years. Antonio Benini. Antonio? She couldn't complete the sentence, so sure she must be mistaken. He was close to her father. He had mourned her mother. Alessandro's face turned a shade paler, but he said nothing. The revelation hung between them, a silent accusation. The implications were staggering. If Antonio was, then he had been having an affair with her mother, betraying her father, the man he had served loyally for decades. I don't understand," Katerina said, her voice shaking. "Antonio, he was like family. He was my father's most trusted advisor." "Trust is a rare commodity in our world," Katerina, Alessandro said, his voice grim. "Especially when it comes to matters of the heart." He closed the laptop, his gaze meeting hers.
"We need to find Antonio," he said.
"He's the key to unlocking the truth about your mother's death." But finding Antonio Benini would not be easy. He had disappeared after the massacre, vanishing without a trace. He was a skilled lawyer, a man who knew how to cover his tracks, a man who had access to vast resources. "He could be anywhere," Katerina said, her voice filled with frustration. "He could have left the country." "He wouldn't leave," a new voice said from the doorway. Both Katerina and Alessandro turned to see a man standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the light of the corridor. He was tall, lean, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing simple, dark clothing, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who is used to danger. Katerina recognized him instantly. It was Dante Moretti. He stepped into the room, his gaze fixed on Katerina. "Antonio wouldn't abandon his secrets," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "He's a creature of habit, a man who clings to the past." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "And he's hiding something. Something big." Dante's presence filled the room with a palpable tension. He was a legend in the Viridia underworld, a man known for his ruthlessness and his unwavering loyalty to the Bellinis. His survival was a miracle, a testament to his strength and his cunning. "Dante," Katerina said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and surprise. How did you find me?" "I've been watching you," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Protecting you. From a distance." He had been the one in the villa. The realization washed over Katerina, a sense of both comfort and unease. He had been watching her, protecting her, but he had also been spying on her, keeping his distance. "Why didn't you reveal yourself sooner?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. He shrugged, his expression enigmatic.
I needed to be sure, he said.
Sure of your loyalty. Sure of your intentions. His words were a challenge, a test. He was assessing her, judging her, deciding whether she was worthy of his trust. The scars on his face, barely visible in the dim light, seemed to deepen as he spoke, silent testament to battles fought and betrayals endured. And those scars, Katerina realized, went deeper than skin. They etched into his soul. Chapter 8. A dance of shadows and secrets. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension. 3 figures, each representing a different facet of the Viridia underworld, stood poised in a silent standoff. Katerina, the fallen principessa, seeking to reclaim her legacy. Alessandro, the ruthless rival, offering a dangerous alliance. And Dante, the loyal enforcer, emerging from the shadows, his motives shrouded in mystery. Dante's gaze shifted from Katerina to Alessandro, his eyes narrowing slightly. He clearly didn't trust the Rossi capo, his presence a silent challenge to Alessandro's authority. What is he doing here? Dante asked, his voice laced with suspicion, his hand instinctively moving towards the bulge of a weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Signor Rossi is assisting me, Katerina replied, her voice carefully neutral, trying to defuse the tension. We have a mutual interest. Dante's eyes flickered back to Katerina, his expression unreadable. He clearly didn't believe her, but he didn't press the issue. He was a soldier, a man of action, not words. He understood the need for alliances, even with enemies. Antonio Benini, Dante said, his voice cutting through the silence. He's a coward. A snake. He wouldn't leave Viridia. He's too attached to his comforts. Do you know where he is? Alessandro asked, his voice sharp, taking control of the conversation. Dante shook his head.
Not yet.
But I have people looking. He's left a trail. A faint one, but it's there. What kind of trail? Katerina asked, her curiosity piqued. Dante hesitated, his gaze shifting between Katerina and Alessandro. He was clearly reluctant to share information, especially with a Rossi present. He's been moving money, Dante finally said. Large sums. Through a series of shell corporations' offshore accounts. He's preparing for something. Or running from something. The revelation sent a new wave of unease through Katerina. Antonio's actions suggested a desperate attempt to escape, to disappear.
But why?
What was he so afraid of? We need to track those transactions, Alessandro said, his mind already working, analyzing the information. Find the source, the destination. That will lead us to him. He turned to his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, accessing his network of informants, his contacts within the financial world. He was a master of information, a man who could unravel the most complex web of secrets. Katerina watched him work, impressed by his efficiency, his ruthlessness. He was a dangerous ally, but he was also a valuable one. She needed his resources, his expertise, to find Antonio and uncover the truth about her mother's death. But she also knew that she couldn't trust him completely. He had his own agenda, his own ambitions. She needed to be careful, to watch her back, to protect herself from his manipulations. Dante remained silent, his presence a constant reminder of the dangers of their world. He was a warrior, a protector, but he was also a wild card, a man with his own loyalties, his own secrets. I'll need access to your network, Dante said, his voice breaking the silence, addressing Alessandro directly. I have my own people, but your resources, they're more extensive. Alessandro nodded, his gaze unwavering.
Agreed, he said.
But everything goes through me. No independent actions.
No surprises.
It was a clear warning, a assertion of his authority. Dante didn't flinch, his expression unchanging. He understood the rules of the game, the need for control, for a unified front. Agreed, Dante said, his voice tight. The two men, rivals by blood and history, had formed a fragile alliance, a temporary truce in the face of a common enemy. But Katerina knew that the truce was fragile, that it could shatter at any moment. As Alessandro worked on his laptop, tracing the financial transactions, Caterina turned to Dante, her voice low and confidential. "Why did you wait so long?"
she asked.
"Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Dante's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resignation.
"I needed to be sure," he said.
"Sure that you weren't compromised. Sure that you were still a Bellini." His words stung, a reminder of her fallen status, of the doubts that had surrounded her after the massacre. But she also understood his caution, his need to protect himself, to protect the remnants of the Bellini family. "I am a Bellini," she said, her voice firm, her chin lifted in defiance. "And I will find out who killed my mother."
"And who betrayed my family."
Dante nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "I believe you," he said. "And I will help you. But be warned, Caterina. The truth, it can be a heavy burden to bear." The hours passed, filled with the relentless tapping of keyboards, the hushed whispers of phone calls, the gradual unraveling of Antonio Benini's secrets. The financial trail led them through a labyrinth of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and dummy transactions, a complex web designed to conceal the truth. But Alessandro, with his expertise and his vast network, was slowly peeling back the layers, revealing the hidden connections, the flow of money. And as they got closer to the truth, Caterina felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition of the darkness that awaited them. Finally, Alessandro leaned back in his chair, his face illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. "I've found something," he said, his voice low and intense. "A connection. A direct link between Antonio Benini and a villa in Switzerland."
"A villa in Switzerland."
The words sent a chill down Caterina's spine. It was a place she had never heard of, a secret hidden from her, from everyone. It was a place where Antonio Benini was hiding, a place where the truth about her mother's death might finally be revealed. But it was also a long way away, and reaching it would mean taking an even greater risk. The dance continued, with each step further into the shadows. Chapter 9. The Price of Freedom's Illusion. Switzerland. The word conjured images of snow-capped mountains, pristine lakes, and a neutrality that felt utterly foreign to the blood-soaked streets of Viridia. It was a sanctuary, a place of escape, a haven for secrets. And now, it was the destination of their perilous journey, the place where they hoped to find Antonio Benini and unravel the truth about Caterina's mother's death. Alessandro had arranged for a private jet, a sleek, unmarked aircraft that would transport them swiftly and discreetly across borders. He had also assembled a small team of his most trusted men, heavily armed and prepared for any eventuality. Caterina, despite her reservations about Alessandro's methods, couldn't deny his efficiency. He was a man who got things done, a man who left nothing to chance. But she also knew that his help came at a price that she might not be willing to pay. Dante, ever the watchful guardian, remained skeptical of Alessandro's motives. He had agreed to the alliance, but his loyalty remained firmly with Caterina, with the Bellini name. He was a silent presence, a constant reminder of the dangers that surrounded them. As they prepared for the journey, Caterina couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the premonition of impending doom. She was stepping into the unknown, venturing far from her familiar territory, placing her trust in a man who had once been her enemy. "Are you sure about this, Caterina?" Dante asked, his voice low and concerned, as they stood on the tarmac, the private jet looming before them. "I have to do this, Dante," she replied, her voice firm, her gaze fixed on the aircraft. "I have to know the truth." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and apprehension.
"Just be careful," he said.
"Alessandro Rossi, he's not to be trusted." "I know," Caterina said, "but I can handle him." She boarded the jet, Alessandro following close behind, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. Dante and his men took their seats, their weapons concealed but readily accessible. The atmosphere was tense, charged with unspoken anticipation. The flight was smooth and uneventful, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines. Caterina stared out the window, Watching the clouds drift by, her mind racing with possibilities, with fears. She replayed the events of the past few weeks, the massacre, the alliance with Alessandro, the discovery of the letters, the revelation about Antonio Benini. It was a whirlwind of chaos and uncertainty, a dangerous game with unpredictable consequences. She thought about her mother, about the secret life she had led, the forbidden love she had pursued. She wondered what kind of woman her mother had really been, what dreams she had harbored, what fears she had concealed. She thought about her father, about the ruthless man he had been, the possessive love he had shown her mother. She wondered if he had known about the affair, if he had been responsible for her mother's death. The thought was a painful dagger in her heart, a betrayal of everything she had believed. As the jet began its descent, Katerina felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. They were approaching their destination, the villa in Switzerland, the place where the truth awaited them. The jet landed smoothly at a small, private airport, nestled in a secluded valley, surrounded by towering mountains. The air was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the humid warmth of Viridia. Alessandro had arranged for a car, a discreet, unmarked vehicle that would transport them to the villa. They drove through the picturesque countryside, the scenery a breathtaking panorama of snow-capped peaks, verdant meadows, and charming villages. But Katerina couldn't appreciate the beauty of the surroundings. Her mind was focused on the task ahead, on confronting Antonio Benini, on uncovering the secrets of her past. They arrived at the villa, a large, imposing structure perched on a hillside overlooking a pristine lake. It was a place of secluded luxury, a haven for the wealthy and the powerful. The villa was surrounded by a high wall, its gates guarded by armed security personnel. Alessandro spoke briefly to the guards, showing them some form of identification. They nodded, their faces impassive, and opened the gates. They drove up a long, winding driveway, lined with tall, cypress trees. The villa loomed before them, its windows dark and secretive. Alessandro parked the car, his gaze fixed on the villa. "This is it," he said, his voice low and intense. "Stay close. And be prepared for anything." He got out of the car, Dante and his men following close behind, their weapons drawn. Katerina took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She was stepping into the lion's den, confronting a man who held the key to her past, a man who might be responsible for her mother's death. As they approached the front door, Katerina felt a sense of foreboding, a premonition of danger. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. The air was thick with anticipation, with the unspoken threat of violence. This was it. No turning back. The carefully constructed illusion of safety, of order, that Alessandro had woven around them for the journey felt flimsy, now brittle as thin ice. The price of finding the truth was looming, and she had the sickening feeling that she was about to be presented with the bill. Chapter 10. Amidst the ruins of lost trust. The heavy oak door of the villa creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. A figure stood silhouetted against the faint light, an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face etched with wrinkles, her eyes dark and wary. "Signor Rossi," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, her Italian tinged with a Swiss accent. "We were not expecting you." "We need to see Antonio Benini," Alessandro said, his voice firm, his tone brooking no argument. "It's a matter of urgent family business." The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering between Alessandro, Katerina, and Dante, assessing the threat they posed. She clearly recognized Alessandro, her expression a mixture of fear and deference. "Signor Benini is indisposed," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He is not receiving visitors." "Tell him it's about Caterina Bellini," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing murmur. "And about her mother." The woman's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. She knew who Caterina was. She knew the significance of her mother's name. She hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Wait here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She closed the door, leaving them standing in the dimly lit hallway. The silence was heavy, pregnant with unspoken tension. Katerina felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. Something was wrong. The woman's demeanor, the hushed atmosphere, the sense of secrecy, it all pointed to something hidden, something dangerous. "Be ready," Dante whispered, his hand resting on the butt of his concealed weapon. "This could be a trap." Katerina nodded, her senses on high alert. She had trusted Alessandro to get them this far, but she knew that she couldn't rely on him completely. He had his own agenda, his own secrets. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence broken only by the distant ticking of a clock. Katerina's heart pounded in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. Finally, the door creaked open again, revealing not the elderly woman, but Antonio Benini himself. He was older than Katerina remembered, his hair completely white, his face lined with wrinkles. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, were the same, filled with a mixture of cunning and apprehension. He was wearing a silk dressing gown, his hands trembling slightly. He looked frail, vulnerable, a shadow of the powerful man he had once been. "Katerina?" he said, his voice raspy, his gaze fixed on her. What are you doing here?" "I came for the truth, Antonio," Katerina said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "The truth about my mother's death." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of fear crossing his face. He glanced at Alessandro, then at Dante, his expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't lie to me, Antonio," Katerina said, her voice rising in anger. "I know about the letters. I know about your affair with my mother." His face paled, his hands trembling more violently. He looked like a cornered animal, trapped and desperate. It wasn't like that," he said, his voice pleading. "It was complicated." "Complicated?" Katerina said, her voice laced with sarcasm. "You betrayed my father. You had an affair with his wife. And then she died. In a convenient accident."
"No,"
Antonio cried, his voice rising in panic. "It wasn't me. I didn't kill her. I loved her." His words hung in the air, a desperate plea for understanding, for forgiveness. But Katerina couldn't believe him, not completely. He was a liar, a deceiver, a man who had betrayed her family. Then who did? Katerina demanded, her voice sharp, her eyes boring into his. "Who killed my mother?" Antonio hesitated, his gaze darting around the room, as if searching for an escape. He looked at Alessandro, his eyes pleading for help. Alessandro remained silent, his expression unreadable. He was watching the scene unfold, observing, analyzing, waiting for the right moment to intervene. "Tell me, Antonio," Katerina shouted, her voice echoing through the hallway. "Tell me the truth." Antonio's body trembled, his eyes filled with tears. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Suddenly, a shot rang out, shattering the silence. Antonio gasped, his eyes widening in surprise, his hand clutching his chest. He stumbled backward, collapsing to the floor, a pool of blood spreading around him. Katerina screamed, her body frozen in shock. Dante reacted instantly, pushing from behind him, his weapon drawn, scanning the hallway for the shooter. Alessandro cursed, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the shot. His men moved quickly, securing the perimeter, their weapons raised. The villa was plunged into chaos, the silence replaced by the shouts of men, the sounds of running footsteps, the echoing reverberation of the gunshot. Katerina stood frozen, staring at Antonio's lifeless body, the blood staining the polished floor. She had come here seeking the truth, but all she had found was more death, more betrayal. The elderly woman, who had admitted them, was now sobbing, a keening wail that pierced through the din. They came from the back, through the gardens. She cried out between gasps, pointing towards a shattered glass door at the end of the hall. Alessandro barked orders, sending his men in pursuit of the assassins. He knelt beside Antonio's body, his face grim. "He's dead," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Katerina felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had witnessed death before, the brutal reality of the mafia world. But this was different. This was personal. This was the man who had loved her mother, the man who held the key to her past. And now he was gone, silenced forever. Dante stood beside her, his arm around her, his body shielding her from the chaos. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "This place is not safe." Alessandro nodded in agreement. "We'll leave immediately," he said to them and the remaining men. "Gather any evidence that you can, but be quick about it." As they turned to leave, Katerina caught a glimpse of something on the floor, near Antonio's outstretched hand. It was a small, silver locket shaped like a heart. She knelt down and picked it up, her fingers trembling. She recognized it instantly. It was her mother's locket, the one she had always worn, the one that contained a miniature portrait of Katerina as a child. She opened the locket, her heart pounding in her chest. The portrait was still there, a faded image of her younger self, a reminder of a happier past. But there was something else in the locket, something hidden behind the portrait. A small, folded piece of paper. Katerina carefully unfolded the paper, her hands shaking. It was a note, written in her mother's handwriting. A note that would change everything. The ruins of the villa, and of her trust, were now holding a devastating secret. Chapter 11. The Unmasking of Hidden Truths. Katerina's hands trembled as she unfolded the delicate paper, the ink faded but still legible. Her mother's familiar handwriting, the elegant script she remembered from childhood, sent a pang of grief through her heart. It was a voice from the past, a message from beyond the grave. The note was brief, concise, and utterly devastating. "My dearest Katerina, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are in danger. The truth about your father is not what you believe. He is not the man you think he is. He is capable of terrible things. Antonio is not your enemy. He is protecting you, just as he promised he would protect me. Trust him. He knows the truth. The serpent is not who you think. I love you, my darling.
Be strong. Be brave."
Your mother." The words hit Katerina like a physical blow, shattering her world, her beliefs, everything she thought she knew about her family. Her father a monster? Antonio a protector? The serpent not who she thought? The note raised more questions than it answered. What terrible things was her father capable of? What was the truth about him? And who was the serpent? She reread the note, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the cryptic message. The words "the serpent is not who you think" echoed in her mind, a chilling warning. The Rossi family crest was a coiled serpent.
Alessandro.
Was he the serpent her mother was referring to? Was he playing a double game, manipulating her, using her to achieve his own ends? The thought sent a shiver of fear down her spine. She had trusted him, relied on him, allowed herself to be vulnerable to him. Had she been a fool? Had she been playing into his hands all along? She looked up at Alessandro, his face grim as he surveyed the scene, his men securing the perimeter, searching for clues. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked, his voice concerned. "What did you find?" Katerina hesitated, unsure whether to trust him, unsure whether to reveal the contents of the note. She clutched the locket tightly in her hand, concealing the note from his view. "It's nothing," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Just a personal item." Alessandro didn't press her, his attention focused on the chaos around them. He was giving orders, coordinating the search, ensuring their escape. Dante, ever watchful, stood beside her, his arm around her, his body shielding her from the danger. He had seen the note. He knew the truth. "We need to go," he said, his voice urgent.
"Now."
They left the villa, the scene of carnage and betrayal, leaving behind the ghosts of the past, the shattered remnants of Katerina's illusions. They drove back to the private airport, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken tension. Katerina sat in the back seat, clutching the locket, her mind reeling from the revelations of the note. She was trapped in a web of lies, deceit, and betrayal, unsure who to trust, unsure who to believe. She looked at Dante, his face grim, his eyes filled with concern. He was the only one she could trust, the only one who had always been loyal to her family. He had proven his loyalty, again and again. "The serpent," she whispered, her voice barely audible.
My mother, she warned me about him.
Dante nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "Alessandro," he said, his voice low and intense. "He cannot be trusted." The flight back to Viridia was filled with a suffocating silence. Katerina sat alone, lost in her thoughts, replaying the events of the past few hours, the words of her mother's note echoing in her mind. Back at the penthouse, with the city lights spread out before them, a mirror to the glittering deception she'd found, Katerina faced the true and dangerous task ahead of her. Alessandro was powerful. If he was the serpent, then he was the one that killed her mother. He orchestrated the death of Antonio. He had laid a trap for her, and she'd walked straight into it. But how to prove it? And how to protect those still loyal to her, while playing the part of the willing pawn? The note was a map and a warning. The unmasking was about to begin, a deadly confrontation that would test Katerina's strength, her cunning, and her will to survive. Chapter 12. Where Loyalty and Love Collide. The penthouse, once a symbol of Katerina's power and privilege, now felt like a gilded cage. The panoramic view of Viridia, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock her with its glittering deception. She was surrounded by enemies, unsure who to trust, unsure where to turn. She had sent Marco and the few remaining loyal Bellini soldiers into hiding, fearing for their safety. Alessandro's reach was long, his power immense. If he was the serpent, then he would stop at nothing to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. Dante remained with her, a silent guardian, his presence a constant reassurance in the midst of her turmoil. He was her anchor, her protector, the only one she could truly rely on. "We need a plan," Katerina said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. "We need to expose Alessandro, to prove his guilt." Dante nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and concern.
It won't be easy, he said.
"He's careful, meticulous. He covers his tracks. But he's not invincible," Katerina countered. "He has weaknesses. We just need to find them." They spent the next few hours brainstorming, analyzing the information they had, searching for any clue, any lead that could expose Alessandro's treachery. They reviewed the letters, the financial transactions, the events leading up to her mother's death and Antonio's assassination. The villa in Switzerland, Katerina said, her mind racing. It must hold some clue, some evidence. Alessandro was too quick to get us out of there. Dante nodded in agreement. "He wanted us gone before we found something," he said. "Something he didn't want us to see." "We need to go back," Katerina said, her voice determined. "But this time we go alone. Without Alessandro." Dante hesitated, his eyes filled with concern. "It's too dangerous," he said. "He'll be watching us. He'll know." "We'll be careful," Katerina said. "We'll be discreet. We'll find a way." She knew it was a risky move, a dangerous gamble. But she couldn't sit idly by, waiting for Alessandro to make his next move. She needed to take control, to fight back, to expose the truth. They planned their return to Switzerland meticulously, taking every precaution to avoid detection. They would use a different route, a different alias, a different mode of transportation. They would be ghosts, invisible, untraceable. But as they finalized their plans, a new complication arose. Alessandro arrived at the penthouse, unannounced, his presence filling the room with a palpable tension. "Katerina," he said, his voice smooth, his eyes assessing her. "I've been thinking about what happened in Switzerland. About Antonio's death." Katerina felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. She had to be careful, to play her part, to conceal her suspicions. "It was a tragedy," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I still can't believe it." He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers.
"He was a loose end," he said.
"A liability." Someone wanted him silenced. But who? Katerina asked, her voice feigning innocence. Who would want him dead? Alessandro shrugged, his expression enigmatic.
"It could be anyone," he said.
A rival family, a disgruntled associate, someone with a grudge. He paused, his eyes searching hers. Or it could have been someone closer to home. His words were a veiled threat, a subtle accusation. He was testing her, probing her, trying to gauge her reaction. "What do you mean?" Katerina asked, her voice trembling slightly, playing the part of the naive, grieving woman. "Your father," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "He had many enemies, many secrets. It's possible that Antonio knew something that could have implicated him." He was trying to deflect suspicion, to shift the blame onto her father. But Katerina knew the truth, or, at least, she thought she did. "My father is dead," she said, her voice firm. "He can't defend himself." Alessandro smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "The dead can still speak, Katerina," he said. "Through their actions, through their legacies, through the secrets they leave behind." He was playing a dangerous game, a game of cat and mouse. He was trying to manipulate her, to control her, to keep her from uncovering the truth. "I need some air," Katerina said, her voice tight, needing to escape his suffocating presence. "I need to think." She walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome relief from the tension of the room. She looked out at the city lights, her mind racing, her heart pounding. She was trapped, caught between two powerful forces, two deadly enemies. Alessandro, the serpent, the man who had betrayed her family, the man who might be responsible for her mother's death. And her father, the ghost from the past, the man whose secrets were threatening to destroy her. Dante joined her on the balcony, his presence a silent comfort. He didn't speak, he just stood beside her, his arm around her, his body shielding her from the world. As she stood there, feeling the warmth of Dante's body next to hers, a new thought occurred to her. A terrifying, yet strangely comforting thought. It wasn't just loyalty that drove Dante. It was something more. Something deeper. She could not act alone on what she felt. Not now. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. She needed his strength, his support, his unwavering loyalty. She realized, needed his love. But love, and where it collided with loyalty, was a dangerous battlefield. And she couldn't afford to lose him. Not now. Not ever. The collision was coming. She had to be prepared, not only for Alessandro, but for whatever this new emotion inside of her brought to the surface. The night was dark, and the path ahead uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Katerina felt a flicker of hope, a spark of warmth in the midst of the cold, harsh reality of her world.
It was a spark she vowed to protect.
Chapter 13. The Ghosts of Promises Broken. The journey back to Switzerland was shrouded in secrecy and tension. Katerina and Dante, using assumed names and traveling separately, took a circuitous route, flying to a small airport in France and then driving across the border in a rented car with untraceable plates. They were ghosts moving through the shadows, determined to avoid detection. Katerina's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, determination, and a growing sense of unease about Alessandro's true motives. The note from her mother had shattered her world, forcing her to question everything she thought she knew about her family, about her past. And then there was Dante. His unwavering loyalty, his quiet strength, his protective presence, it was a lifeline in the midst of her turmoil. She had realized, with a startling clarity on the balcony of the penthouse, that her feelings for him ran deeper than gratitude, deeper than friendship. It was love, a love born of shared danger, shared loss, and a shared determination to survive. But she couldn't allow herself to be distracted by those feelings, not now. She had a mission, a dangerous task ahead of her. She needed to focus, to be sharp, to uncover the truth about her mother's death and expose Alessandro's treachery. They arrived at the villa under the cover of darkness, the imposing structure looming before them, its windows dark and secretive. The security guards were still present, but Dante, with his knowledge of the underworld and its hidden pathways, found a way to bypass them, slipping through the shadows like a wraith. They entered the villa through the shattered glass door, the scene of Antonio's assassination still fresh in Katerina's mind. The bloodstains had been cleaned, but the memory lingered, a chilling reminder of the violence that had transpired. "We need to be quick," Dante whispered, his hand resting on the butt of his concealed weapon. "And quiet." They searched the villa meticulously, room by room, looking for any clue, any evidence that Alessandro might have missed. They examined the furniture, the carpets, the walls, searching for hidden compartments, secret passages, anything that could shed light on the truth. Caterina focused on Antonio's office, the place where he had spent most of his time, the place where he had kept his secrets. She searched his desk, his files, his computer, looking for any mention of her mother, any hint of his involvement in her death. She found a hidden compartment behind a bookcase, a small, locked safe. Dante, with his expertise in such matters, managed to open it, revealing a collection of documents, photographs, and a small, leather-bound diary. Caterina's heart pounded in her chest as she opened the diary. It was Antonio's personal journal, his innermost thoughts, his secrets, his confessions. She began to read, her eyes scanning the faded ink, her mind racing to absorb the information. The diary entries confirmed what the letters had suggested. Antonio had been deeply in love with her mother, their affair a passionate, forbidden romance that had spanned years. He had helped her plan her escape, her desperate attempt to break free from her father's control. But the diary also revealed something else, something that sent a chill down Caterina's spine. Her father had known about the affair. He had discovered their plan, and he had been furious, consumed by a jealous rage. The last entry in the diary was dated just a few days before her mother's death. It spoke of a confrontation, a violent argument between her father and Antonio. Her father had threatened to kill her mother, to make her pay for her betrayal. Caterina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The truth was staring her in the face, a horrifying reality that shattered everything she had believed about her father. He had killed her mother. He had staged the accident, covering up his crime, silencing the woman he had claimed to love. "Dante," she croaked, pointing. Dante read over her shoulder, and his body went rigid. He cursed softly in Italian. As Caterina, reeling, tried to process it all, Dante turned a page. There, taped to the back of the diary, was a small memory card. "A recording," Dante murmured. "Probably from a hidden camera or a listening device." They found a laptop in the office, and Dante quickly inserted the memory card. A video file appeared on the screen. Dante clicked on it, and the room was filled with the sound of voices, of an argument, of a struggle. It was a recording of the confrontation between her father and Antonio, the final, violent argument before her mother's death. Caterina watched in horror as her father, his face contorted with rage, threatened her mother, accused her of betrayal, vowed to make her pay. The video ended abruptly, just before the sound of a car crash, the screech of tires, the shattering of glass. The evidence was undeniable. Her father had killed her mother. He had been a monster, a liar, a murderer. Caterina felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She had spent her life idolizing her father, believing in his strength, his power, his love for her mother. But it had all been a lie, a carefully constructed facade that concealed a dark, twisted truth. Tears streamed down Caterina's face, tears of grief, of anger, of betrayal. Dante put his arm around her, holding her close, his presence a silent comfort. "I know," he whispered, his voice filled with empathy. "I know." But the revelations weren't over. As they were about to leave the villa, Dante noticed something else, something that Caterina had missed. A small, almost imperceptible scratch on the floor, near the shattered glass door. He knelt down, examining the scratch more closely. He pulled out a small penknife and carefully pried up a loose floorboard. Beneath it, he found a small, hidden compartment. Inside the compartment, there was a single object. A silver cigarette case, engraved with a familiar crest. A coiled serpent. The Rossi family crest. Caterina stared at the cigarette case, her mind reeling.
Alessandro.
It was his. He had been here. He had been involved in Antonio's death. He had been playing her all along. He was the serpent. The ghosts of the promises he'd made, of the alliance they'd forged, mocked her now. The game was far from over. It was just beginning. Chapter 14. A glimmer of hope in the abyss. The silver cigarette case, emblazoned with the Rossi serpent, was a cold, hard piece of evidence, a damning indictment of Alessandro's treachery. It confirmed Katerina's worst fears, validating her mother's cryptic warning. He was the serpent, the mastermind behind the web of lies, deceit, and betrayal that had ensnared her. Katerina felt a surge of anger, a burning desire for revenge. She had trusted Alessandro, allowed herself to be vulnerable to him, shared her secrets, her fears. And he had betrayed her, used her, manipulated her for his own twisted purposes. But amidst the anger, there was also a flicker of fear. Alessandro was powerful, ruthless, and resourceful. He had connections everywhere, his influence extending to every corner of Viridia. Exposing him, bringing him to justice, would be a dangerous, almost impossible task. Dante, ever the pragmatist, saw the danger clearly. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He'll be expecting us. He'll be watching our every move." "He won't expect this," Katerina countered, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. She held up the cigarette case, the silver gleaming in the dim light. "This is proof. This is evidence. This will bring him down." They left the villa, slipping back into the shadows, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They knew that they were walking into a trap, that Alessandro would be waiting for them, ready to pounce. But they had no choice. They had to confront him, to expose his crimes, to avenge the deaths of her mother and Antonio. They had to fight for their own survival, for the future of the Bellini name. They returned to Viridia, their journey shrouded in secrecy and tension. They knew that they couldn't go back to the penthouse, that it was no longer safe. Alessandro would be watching it, waiting for them. Dante, with his network of contacts in the Viridia underworld, found them a safe house, a hidden apartment in a nondescript building, far from the prying eyes of Alessandro and his men. It was a small, sparsely furnished space, but it was secure, and it was anonymous. "We need to plan our next move," Katerina said, her mind racing, trying to formulate a strategy. "We need to find a way to expose Alessandro without getting ourselves killed." They spent hours discussing their options, analyzing the information they had, weighing the risks and the potential consequences. They knew that they couldn't go to the authorities, that the police were corrupt, that Alessandro had them in his pocket. "We need someone we can trust," Katerina said. "Someone with power, someone with influence, someone who is not afraid of Alessandro." Dante nodded in agreement. "There's only one person who fits that description," he said. "Donatella Lombardi." Donatella Lombardi, the head of the Lombardi family, the shrewd, opportunistic capo who had always played both sides, aligning herself with whoever held the upper hand. She was a dangerous woman, a woman with her own agenda, her own ambitions. But she was also a woman who respected power, who understood the rules of the game. "She won't help us out of the goodness of her heart," Katerina said. "She'll want something in return. She'll want power," Dante said. "She'll want to be the one in charge. She'll want to take Alessandro's place." It was a risky move, a dangerous alliance. But it was also their only hope. Donatella Lombardi was the only one who could stand up to Alessandro, the only one who could challenge his authority. Katerina hesitated, her mind filled with doubt. Could she trust Donatella? Could she rely on a woman who had always been known for her treachery, her opportunism? But then she thought about Alessandro, about his betrayal, his cruelty, his ruthlessness. She thought about her mother, about Antonio, about all the lives he had destroyed. She had to do something. She had to fight back. "We'll do it," she said, her voice firm, her resolve unwavering. "We'll contact Donatella Lombardi." Dante, using his secure communication channels, arranged a meeting with Donatella, a clandestine rendezvous in a neutral location, far from the prying eyes of Alessandro. The meeting took place in a small, abandoned church on the outskirts of Viridia, a place steeped in history and secrecy. Donatella arrived with her own entourage of heavily armed guards, her face impassive, her eyes watchful. Caterina, accompanied by Dante, presented her case, laying out the evidence against Alessandro, the silver cigarette case, the diary entries, the video recording. She spoke with passion, with conviction, her voice filled with anger and determination. Donatella listened intently, her expression unreadable. She was assessing Caterina, judging her strength, her resolve, her credibility. "And what do you want from me?" Donatella asked, her voice sharp, her gaze piercing. "We want your help," Caterina said. "We want you to expose Alessandro, to bring him to justice. We want you to help us reclaim what is rightfully ours." Donatella smiled, a slow, knowing smile.
"And in return?"
she asked. "In return," Caterina said, "you will have the support of the remaining Bellini loyalists. You will have access to our resources, our connections. You will be the most powerful capo in Viridia." It was a bold offer, a dangerous gamble. But it was the only way to secure Donatella's support, the only way to defeat Alessandro. Donatella considered the offer, her mind racing, calculating the risks and the potential rewards. She knew that Alessandro was a formidable enemy, a man who would stop at nothing to protect his power. But she also knew that Caterina's evidence was damning, that it could bring him down. Finally, she nodded, her gaze meeting Caterina's. "I accept," she said. "But be warned, Caterina Bellini. This is a dangerous game, and there can only be one winner." A fragile alliance had been formed, a pact between two powerful women, each with her own agenda, her own ambitions. It was a glimmer of hope in the abyss, a chance to fight back, to reclaim what had been lost. But it was also a descent into a new level of danger, a step further into the darkness. The air in the old church seemed to shift, charged with the unspoken promises and the inevitable betrayals to come. Chapter 15. The Reckoning of Old Vendettas. The alliance with Donatella Lombardi was a double-edged sword. It offered a path to justice, a chance to expose Alessandro and reclaim the Bellini legacy, but it also plunged Caterina deeper into the treacherous world of mafia politics, where loyalty was a fleeting illusion and betrayal a constant threat. Donatella, true to her reputation, moved swiftly and decisively. She used her vast network of informants, her connections within the police and the judiciary, to gather more evidence against Alessandro, to build a case that would be irrefutable. She also began to consolidate her power, subtly undermining Alessandro's authority, drawing his allies to her side, isolating him from his support base. She was a master strategist, a woman who knew how to play the game of power, and she played it with ruthless efficiency. Caterina, while grateful for Donatella's support, remained wary of her motives. She knew that Donatella was not driven by altruism, that she had her own agenda, her own ambitions. She was using Caterina to achieve her own goals, to become the undisputed ruler of the Viridia underworld. Dante, ever the loyal protector, shared Caterina's concerns. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low and cautious. "Donatella is not to be trusted. She'll turn on us the moment it serves her purpose." "I know," Caterina said, "but we have no choice. She's the only one who can help us defeat Alessandro." They continued to work together, sharing information, coordinating their efforts, preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Alessandro. They knew that he wouldn't go down without a fight, that he would use all his resources, all his power, to protect himself. As Donatella's campaign against Alessandro gained momentum, the tension in Viridia reached a fever pitch. Whispers of betrayal, of shifting alliances, of impending war, circulated through the streets, the trattorias, the hidden backrooms where the famiglia conducted their business. Alessandro, realizing that he was losing ground, became increasingly desperate. He lashed out, ordering his men to attack Donatella's businesses, to intimidate her allies, to silence anyone who dared to speak out against him. The city became a battleground, a scene of escalating violence, of drive-by shootings, of bombings, of assassinations. The fragile peace that had once existed between the families was shattered, replaced by a brutal, all-out war. Katerina and Dante found themselves caught in the crossfire, forced to navigate the dangerous landscape of shifting loyalties and hidden agendas. They were constantly on the move, changing safe houses, avoiding detection, relying on their wits and their skills to survive. One evening, as they were meeting with Donatella in a secluded warehouse, discussing their strategy, they were ambushed. Alessandro's men, armed with automatic weapons, stormed the building, unleashing a hail of bullets. Katerina and Dante reacted instantly, drawing their weapons, returning fire. The warehouse erupted in chaos, the air filled with a deafening roar of gunfire, the screams of men, the shattering of glass. Dante, ever the protector, shielded Katerina with his body, pushing her behind a stack of crates, protecting her from the onslaught. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered lion, his movements precise, his aim deadly. Katerina, despite her fear, fought alongside him, her own weapon blazing, her heart pounding in her chest. She had learned to fight, to survive, in the brutal world of the Mafia. She was a Bellini, and she would not go down without a fight. Donatella and her men also fought back, their weapons blazing, their faces grim with determination. The warehouse became a scene of carnage, a brutal battle between two warring factions. The firefight lasted for what seemed like an eternity, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder, of blood, of death. Finally, Alessandro's men, outnumbered and outgunned, retreated, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Katerina, Dante, and Donatella emerged from the battle shaken but alive. They had survived the ambush, but they knew that it was just the beginning. Alessandro was desperate, and he would stop at nothing to eliminate them. "He's getting reckless," Donatella said, her voice grim, her face streaked with soot and blood. "He's losing control." "We need to end this," Katerina said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. "We need to expose him, to bring him down, before he destroys everything." They knew that they had to act quickly, that they couldn't wait any longer. They had the evidence, they had Donatella's support, they had the momentum.
It was time to strike.
Donatella, using her connections within the judiciary, arranged for a secret meeting with a judge, a man known for his integrity, a man who was not afraid of Alessandro. They presented him with the evidence, the cigarette case, the diary entries, the video recording, the testimony of witnesses who had been intimidated into silence. The judge, shocked by the revelations, agreed to issue a warrant for Alessandro's arrest. It was a risky move, a bold challenge to Alessandro's power. But it was the only way to bring him to justice, to end his reign of terror. The reckoning was at hand, a culmination of old vendettas and a desperate fight for a new future. But the cost, Katerina knew, would be high. Chapter 16. Embracing the Flames of Defiance. The warrant for Alessandro's arrest was a spark that ignited the already simmering tensions in Viridia. It was a declaration of war, a challenge to his authority that he couldn't ignore. He retaliated swiftly and brutally, ordering his men to hunt down Katerina, Dante, and Donatella to silence them permanently. The city became a war zone, the streets echoing with the sounds of gunfire, the sirens of police cars, the screams of the innocent caught in the crossfire. Katerina, Dante, and Donatella went into hiding, moving from one safe house to another, constantly on the run, relying on their wits and their skills to survive. They knew that Alessandro wouldn't rest until he had eliminated them, until he had crushed the rebellion that threatened his power. He was a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous, and he would stop at nothing to protect himself. Katerina, despite the fear that gnawed at her, felt a surge of defiance, a burning determination to see this through to the end. She had come too far, lost too much, to back down now. She would fight for her family, for her legacy, for her future. She also fought for Dante. The love that had blossomed between them, amidst the danger and the chaos, was a source of strength, a beacon of hope in the darkness. She knew that they might not survive this, that their love might be cut short before it had a chance to truly flourish. But she cherished every moment, every touch, every whispered word. One evening, as they were hiding in a small, abandoned apartment, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Dante turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "Katerina," he said, his voice low and tender. "I need to tell you something." Katerina's heart skipped a beat. She knew what he was going to say. She had seen it in his eyes, felt it in his touch. "I love you," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I've loved you for a long time, since before all of this." Tears welled up in Katerina's eyes. She had longed to hear those words, to know that her feelings were reciprocated. "I love you too, Dante," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "More than anything." They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated love, a brief respite from the danger and the fear that surrounded them. But the moment was short-lived. A sudden noise, the sound of footsteps approaching, shattered the silence. They were found. Dante reacted instantly, pushing Katerina behind him, his weapon drawn. He knew that this could be their last stand, that they might not survive this encounter. Alessandro's men stormed the apartment, their weapons blazing. Dante returned fire, his movements precise, his aim deadly. He fought with the ferocity of a lion protecting his mate, determined to keep Katerina safe, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. Katerina, despite her fear, fought alongside him, her own weapon blazing, her heart pounding in her chest. She would not be a victim. She would not be a damsel in distress. She was a Bellini, and she would fight to the death. The apartment erupted in chaos, the air filled with the deafening roar of gunfire, the screams of men, the shattering of glass. It was a brutal, desperate battle, a fight for survival. Katerina saw Dante take a bullet to the shoulder. He staggered, but he kept fighting, his determination unwavering. She screamed his name, her voice filled with anguish, but she kept firing, protecting him, protecting herself. They were losing. Suddenly, a new wave of gunfire erupted from the hallway. Donatella's men had arrived, reinforcements sent to rescue them. The tide of the battle turned. Alessandro's men, outnumbered and outgunned, began to retreat. Katerina rushed to Dante's side, her hands trembling as she examined his wound. It was bad, but not fatal. He was alive. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice urgent.
Now.
Donatella's men helped them escape, providing cover fire as they retreated from the apartment, leaving behind a scene of carnage and destruction. They took Dante to a secret clinic, a place where they could treat his wound without fear of discovery. Katerina stayed by Dante's side, watching over him, praying for his recovery. She knew that they were still in danger, that Alessandro would not give up, but for now, they were safe. As Dante lay unconscious, his breathing shallow, Katerina realized the depth of her love for him, the strength of their bond. She would not let him die. She would not let Alessandro win. She made a decision, a bold, dangerous decision that would change everything. She would confront Alessandro herself. She would lure him into a trap, a final showdown where only one of them would survive. She embraced the flames of her defiance. She was prepared to burn everything down if it meant ending the serpentine reign over Viridia. Chapter 17. The Unseen Threads of Destiny. Katerina's decision to confront Alessandro alone was a calculated risk, a desperate gamble born of love, loss, and a burning desire for revenge. She knew that she was walking into a trap, that Alessandro would be expecting her, that he would be prepared to kill her. But she had no choice. She couldn't let him continue his reign of terror. She couldn't let him destroy everything she held dear. She planned the confrontation meticulously, choosing a location that was both symbolic and strategic, the Bellini ancestral home, the place where it all began, the place where her family's legacy had been forged and where it had been shattered. The villa was in ruins, a shell of its former grandeur, a testament to the violence and betrayal that had consumed the Bellini family. But it was also a place of power, a place where Katerina felt a connection to her ancestors, a place where she could draw strength from their memory. She sent a message to Alessandro, a coded communication that only he would understand, challenging him to a final showdown, a one-on-one confrontation at the villa. She knew that he wouldn't be able to resist, that his pride, his arrogance, his desire to crush her completely would compel him to accept. Dante, still recovering from his wound, pleaded with her not to go, begging her to let Donatella's men handle it, to let the authorities deal with Alessandro. But Caterina was adamant. This was her fight, her responsibility, her destiny. "I have to do this, Dante," she said, her voice firm, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sadness. "For my mother, for Antonio, for my family, for us." He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and concern. He knew that he couldn't stop her, that her mind was made up. "Then I'm going with you," he said, his voice resolute. Caterina shook her head.
"No," she said.
"You're still injured. You need to stay here, to be safe." "I won't let you face him alone," Dante insisted. "I won't let you die." "You won't be alone, Cara," a new voice said. Donatella Lombardi stepped out of the shadows, her face grim, her eyes determined. "I'm with you, Caterina, until the very end." Caterina and Donatella had formed a grudging respect for each other, a bond forged in the crucible of their shared struggle. Donatella saw in Caterina, perhaps for the first time, something more than a pawn to be used. And Caterina knew that, although Donatella's motives were always complicated, she could be relied upon in this. With Donatella and a handful of her most trusted soldiers, and over Dante's furious but weakened objections, Caterina traveled to the villa. The villa stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, a haunting reminder of a bygone era. The air was thick with anticipation, with the unspoken threat of violence. Caterina felt a sense of both dread and determination, a mixture of fear and resolve. She entered the villa, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind through the shattered windows. She found Alessandro waiting for her in the main hall, the place where her father had once held court, the place where the Bellini power had been concentrated. He was standing by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand, his face a mask of cold indifference. "Caterina," he said, his voice smooth, his eyes assessing her. "I knew you'd come." "You killed my mother," Caterina said, her voice trembling with anger, her hand resting on the concealed weapon beneath her jacket. "You killed Antonio. You betrayed my family." Alessandro smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "Your mother was a liability," he said. "A weakness. She had to be eliminated." "And Antonio?" Caterina demanded. "He knew too much," Alessandro said. "He was a threat. He had to be silenced." "And me?" Caterina asked, her voice rising in fury. "What was I to you? A pawn? A tool? A toy to be played with?" Alessandro took a sip of his scotch, his eyes never leaving hers.
"You were an amusement," he said.
"A challenge. A way to finally crush the Bellini name." Caterina's hand tightened around her weapon. She wanted to kill him, to end his life, to avenge the deaths of her loved ones. But she knew that she had to be careful, that he was expecting her to attack. "It's over, Alessandro," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "Your reign of terror is over. I have the evidence. I have the witnesses. You will pay for your crimes." Alessandro laughed, a cold, mocking laugh that echoed through the hall. "You have nothing, Caterina," he said. "You are alone. You are powerless. You are finished." "I'm not alone," Caterina said, her voice ringing with defiance. At that moment, Donatella and her men stepped out of the shadows, their weapons trained on Alessandro. He was surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. Alessandro's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't anticipated Donatella's intervention. He had underestimated Caterina, underestimated her strength, her resolve, her cunning. "Donatella," Alessandro said, his voice tight, his eyes darting between Caterina and the armed men. "What is the meaning of this?" "It means you're finished, Alessandro," Donatella said, her voice cold, her gaze unwavering. "Your time is up." Alessandro, realizing that he was trapped, made one final, desperate move. He lunged for Caterina, his hand reaching for a concealed weapon. But Caterina was faster. She drew her own weapon, firing a single shot, the bullet striking Alessandro in the chest. He staggered backward, his eyes widening in shock, his hand clutching his wound. He collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing, his lifeblood staining the ancient stones of the Bellini villa. The serpent was dead. The unseen threads of destiny, woven through years of betrayal, love, and loss, had finally snapped. Chapter 18. A fragile truce in the storm. Alessandro's death was a turning point, a seismic shift in the power dynamics of the Viridia underworld. The serpent's reign of terror was over, his network of corruption and violence dismantled, his allies scattered and demoralized. But his demise also created a vacuum, a void that needed to be filled, a new order that needed to be established. Donatella Lombardi, as she had planned, stepped into that void, consolidating her power, asserting her authority, becoming the undisputed ruler of Viridia. She was a shrewd, ruthless leader, but she was also pragmatic, understanding the need for stability, for a fragile peace after the years of chaos and bloodshed. Caterina, while relieved that Alessandro was gone, remained wary of Donatella's ambitions. She knew that Donatella was not a benevolent ruler, that she had her own agenda, her own ruthless methods. But she also recognized that Donatella was the only one who could maintain order, who could prevent the city from descending back into all-out war. A fragile truce was established between the remaining families, a tentative agreement to coexist, to respect each other's territories, to avoid further bloodshed. It was an uneasy peace, built on a foundation of mistrust and simmering resentment, but it was better than the alternative. Dante, recovering from his wound, remained by Caterina's side, his love and loyalty unwavering. He had been her rock, her protector, her confidant throughout the ordeal, and she knew that she couldn't have done it without him. They had confessed their love for each other, a love born of shared danger, shared loss, and a shared determination to survive. But their future remained uncertain, their path clouded by the shadows of the past, the challenges of the present. Caterina, while grieving for her mother and Antonio, also felt a sense of liberation, a release from the burden of her family's legacy, from the weight of her father's sins. She was free to forge her own path, to create her own destiny, to build a new future. She decided to leave the Bellini ancestral home, the place of so much pain and betrayal, and start anew. She found a small, secluded villa overlooking the sea, a place of peace and tranquility, far from the chaos and violence of the city. She and Dante moved into the villa together, their love a beacon of hope in the midst of the storm. They spent their days walking on the beach, exploring the countryside, sharing quiet moments of intimacy and connection. But Caterina knew that she couldn't completely escape her past, that the shadows of the Bellini legacy would always linger. She still had responsibilities, obligations, a duty to the remaining loyalists who would serve her family for generations. She decided to use her influence, her resources, to help them, to provide them with a new life, a new purpose. She established a foundation, a charitable organization that would support the victims of mafia violence, that would provide education and opportunities for the children of the families, that would help them break free from the cycle of crime and poverty. She also worked with Donatella, albeit cautiously, to reform the Viridia underworld, to create a more just, more equitable system. She knew that it was an uphill battle, that the old ways were deeply ingrained, but she was determined to make a difference, to create a better future for her city. One evening, as she and Dante were sitting on the terrace of their villa, watching the sunset over the sea, Caterina felt a sense of peace, a sense of contentment that she hadn't felt in years. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not as beautiful as you," Dante said, his voice tender, his arm around her waist. Caterina smiled, leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder. She knew that their life wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges ahead, that the shadows of the past would always be with them. But she also knew that they had each other, that their love was strong, that they could face anything together. "What will you do now?" Dante asked, his voice curious. "Will you stay involved? Or will you walk away?" Katerina thought for a moment, considering her options. She could retreat, disappear, live a quiet, anonymous life, far from the dangers of the Viridia underworld. Or she could stay, fight, use her influence, her power, to make a difference. "I don't know," she said, her voice honest. "I need time to think, to heal, to decide." But deep down, she knew that she couldn't walk away, that she couldn't abandon her city, her people. She was a Bellini, and even though she had rejected the darkness of her family's past, she was still bound by a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility. The fragile truce held, but it was tested daily. Old rivalries, new ambitions, and the ever-present threat of violence loomed over Viridia. Katerina knew that her journey was far from over, that the storm was still raging. But she also knew that she was no longer alone, that she had Dante by her side, and that together, they could weather any storm. The air was heavy with the scent of the sea, and with the unspoken promise of a future yet to be written. Chapter 19. The Heart's Silent Confession. The peace that settled over Viridia was a fragile thing, a delicate balance maintained by Donatello Lombardi's iron fist and Caterina's quiet influence. The wounds of the past were still raw, the memories of betrayal and violence still fresh, but there was a tentative hope, a cautious optimism that a new era was dawning. Caterina and Dante settled into their life together at the seaside villa, their love a refuge from the storms of the outside world. They spent their days exploring the countryside, sharing quiet meals, and rediscovering the simple joys of life that had been denied to them for so long. But Caterina couldn't completely escape the pull of her past, the responsibilities that came with the Bellini name. She continued to work with her foundation, helping the victims of mafia violence, providing opportunities for the children of the families, striving to break the cycle of crime and poverty. She also maintained a cautious relationship with Donatella, offering advice, mediating disputes, and using her influence to maintain the fragile peace. She knew that Donatella was a ruthless leader, but she also recognized that she was the only one who could keep the volatile families in check. One day, Donatella summoned Caterina to a meeting, a gathering of the heads of the major families, a council of sorts that she had established to maintain order and resolve disputes. "Caterina," Donatella said, her voice sharp, her gaze piercing. "We have a problem." Caterina felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. The peace was always precarious, always on the verge of shattering. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm, her expression guarded. "The Ferraras," Donatella said. "They're getting restless. They're challenging my authority. They're making moves on our territory." The Ferraras, the Bellini's oldest rivals, had always been a thorn in their side, a constant source of conflict and tension. They had been weakened by the recent war, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. "What do you want me to do?" Caterina asked. "I want you to talk to them," Donatella said. "You have a connection with them. You understand their ways. You can reason with them." Caterina hesitated. She had no desire to get involved in another conflict, to return to the world of violence and betrayal that she had tried to escape. But she also knew that she had a responsibility, a duty to maintain the peace, to protect her city. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. "But on my own terms." Donatella nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "As you wish," she said. Caterina arranged a meeting with Marco Ferrara, the current head of the Ferrara family, a young, ambitious man who had inherited his father's ruthlessness and his thirst for power. They met in a neutral location, a small, unassuming restaurant in a quiet neighborhood, far from the prying eyes of their respective families. Caterina arrived alone, unarmed, a gesture of trust, a sign that she was seeking peace, not war. Marco Ferrara, accompanied by several of his bodyguards, greeted her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. He was a handsome man, with dark hair and piercing eyes, but there was a coldness in his gaze, a hardness in his demeanor. "Caterina Bellini," he said, his voice smooth, his tone laced with a subtle mockery. To what do I owe this honor? I'm here to talk about peace, Marco, Katerina said, her voice calm, her expression unwavering. About avoiding another war. He laughed, a short, cynical laugh. Peace?
He said.
There is no peace in Viridia. There is only power. And the Ferraras intend to take what is rightfully ours. What is rightfully yours? Katerina asked, her voice rising slightly. Violence? Betrayal?
Death.
He leaned closer, his eyes locking with hers. What was rightfully ours was taken by your family, he said, his voice low and menacing. By your father.
By you.
My father is dead, Katerina said, her voice firm. And I am not my father. I want a different future. For all of us. A different future?
He scoffed.
You're a naive fool, Katerina. You think you can change the way things are? You think you can erase the past? I can try, Katerina said. And I will. With or without your help. They talked for hours, their conversation a tense dance of words, of accusations, of veiled threats, of unspoken desires. Katerina argued for peace, for cooperation, for a new way of doing things. Marco argued for power, for revenge, for the old ways. But as they talked, Katerina began to see something else in Marco's eyes, something beyond the coldness, the hardness. She saw a flicker of doubt, a hint of vulnerability, a longing for something more. She realized that he was trapped, just as she had been, trapped by the legacy of his family, by the expectations of his people, by the cycle of violence that had consumed Viridia for generations. She spoke to him not as a Bellini to a Ferrara, but as a woman to a man, as a human being to another human being. She spoke of her own struggles, her own losses, her own desire for a better future. She spoke of Dante, of their love, of their hope for a life free from fear, from violence, from betrayal. She spoke from her heart, her words raw, honest, and vulnerable. And as she spoke, she saw a change in Marco's demeanor, a softening of his gaze, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He was listening, truly listening for the first time. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. What do you propose, Katerina? He asked, his voice softer, his tone less hostile. Katerina outlined a plan, a proposal for a new alliance, a new partnership between the Bellinis and the Ferraras, a way to share power, to share resources, to work together for the common good. It was a radical idea, a bold departure from the old ways, but it was also a chance for a new beginning, a chance to break the cycle of violence, to create a better future for Viridia. Marco hesitated, his mind clearly wrestling with the implications of her proposal. It went against everything he had been taught, everything he had believed. But then, he looked at Katerina, at her earnest face, her pleading eyes, and he saw something that he hadn't seen before. He saw hope. He saw a chance for redemption. He saw the possibility of love. He nodded slowly, his gaze meeting hers. I'll consider it, he said, his voice low, his tone thoughtful. I'll talk to my people. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was a start. It was a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Katerina had planted a seed of peace, a seed of change. Whether it would grow, whether it would flourish, remained to be seen. But for the first time in a long time, Katerina felt a sense of optimism, a belief that a better future was possible. The heart, in its silent confession of longing for peace, had spoken. And, surprisingly, it had been heard. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Marco Ferrara's agreement to consider Katerina's proposal was a significant step towards peace, but it was far from a guarantee. The old rivalries, the deep-seated mistrust, the ingrained culture of violence were not easily overcome. Katerina knew that she had a long and difficult road ahead of her, that she would face opposition, resistance, and betrayal. But she was not alone. She had Dante by her side, his love and loyalty a constant source of strength. And she had, surprisingly, a growing respect from Donatello Lombardi, who saw in Katerina a valuable ally, a woman who could bridge the divides between the families, who could help create a new order in Viridia. Katerina worked tirelessly, meeting with the heads of the other families, negotiating agreements, mediating disputes, and using her influence to promote peace and cooperation. She was a diplomat, a strategist, a peacemaker, a role that she had never envisioned for herself, but one that she embraced with determination and grace. Dante, while supportive of Caterina's efforts, remained wary of the other families, especially the Ferraras. He had seen too much violence, too much betrayal, to trust easily. He was her protector, her shadow, always watching, always ready to defend her. One evening, as they were preparing for another meeting with the family heads, Dante expressed his concerns. "Caterina," he said, his voice low and serious. "I don't trust Marco Ferrara. He's playing a game. He's waiting for an opportunity to strike." Caterina sighed, knowing that Dante's fears were not unfounded.
"I know," she said, "but we have to try.
"We have to give peace a chance." "Peace is a luxury we cannot afford," Dante said. "Not in this world." "Then we'll make our own peace," Caterina said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting his. "We'll create our own world." She kissed him, a passionate, desperate kiss that conveyed all the love, all the fear, all the hope that she felt. It was a promise, a vow, a declaration of their unbreakable bond. The meeting with the family heads was tense, fraught with suspicion and veiled threats. Marco Ferrara, while outwardly cooperative, seemed to be holding back, his eyes betraying a hidden agenda. Donatello Lombardi, ever the pragmatist, kept the meeting focused on practical matters, on establishing rules of engagement, on dividing territories, on ensuring a balance of power. But Caterina sensed that something was amiss, that there was an undercurrent of tension, a sense of impending conflict. She felt a growing unease, a premonition of danger. As the meeting was drawing to a close, a sudden commotion erupted outside the building. Gunshots, shouts, screams. They were under attack. Dante reacted instantly, pushing Caterina to the floor, shielding her with his body. Donatello's men drew their weapons, returning fire. The room erupted in chaos, a scene of violence and confusion. "Ferrara!" Dante shouted, his voice filled with rage. "It's a trap." But Marco Ferrara, to Caterina's surprise, looked genuinely shocked, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was not the one who ordered it. "No," he shouted above the din. "I swear."
"It wasn't me."
Caterina, in that moment, believed him. She saw the truth in his eyes, the genuine fear, the confusion.
He was not the enemy.
At least, not this enemy. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man Caterina recognized instantly. It was Riccardo, Alessandro Rossi's cousin, a man who had been presumed dead, a man who had vanished after Alessandro's demise. Riccardo was holding a gun, his face contorted with rage, his eyes filled with a burning hatred. "This is for Alessandro," he shouted. "For the Rossi family." He aimed the gun at Caterina, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Marco Ferrara, in a surprising act of bravery, leaped in front of Caterina, shielding her with his body. The shot rang out, striking Marco in the chest. He staggered backward, his eyes widening in shock, his hand clutching his wound. He collapsed to the floor, his body limp. Caterina screamed, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She crawled to Marco's side, her hands trembling as she tried to staunch the bleeding.
"Marco,"
she cried.
"No. Please, no."
He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, with regret, with a flicker of something that looked like love. "Caterina," he whispered, his voice weak, his breath fading. "I am sorry." His eyes closed, his body went still. He was gone. Dante pulled Caterina away, his arms around her, his body shaking with grief and rage. Donatello's men, along with those of the Ferraras loyal to Marco, overwhelmed Riccardo, disarming him, taking him prisoner. The attack was over, but the cost was devastating. Marco Ferrara, the man who had been her enemy, had died saving her life, sacrificing himself for a woman he had once despised. Caterina was heartbroken, overwhelmed by grief, by guilt, by the senseless violence that had claimed another life. She had tried to build peace, to create a new future, but the past, it seemed, would not let her go. The final confrontation had been not of families, but of hearts. A heart twisted by revenge, and a heart, unexpectedly, moved by loyalty and a love that would never be. Epilogue. The aftermath of the attack was a period of mourning, of reflection, and of rebuilding. Marco Ferrara's sacrifice had shocked the Viridia underworld, forcing the families to confront the brutal reality of their endless cycle of violence. His death, ironically, became the catalyst for a genuine, albeit fragile, peace. Donatella Lombardi, recognizing the shift in power dynamics, used the opportunity to solidify her authority, but she also made concessions, reaching out to the other families, offering compromises, and establishing a council where grievances could be aired and disputes resolved peacefully. Caterina, devastated by Marco's death, withdrew from the day-to-day affairs of the families, focusing instead on her foundation, on helping the victims of mafia violence, on creating a better future for the children of Viridia. She found solace in her work, in the small victories, in the lives she touched, in the hope that she could make a difference. Dante remained by her side, his love and support unwavering. He understood her grief, her guilt, her need to find meaning in the midst of tragedy. He was her anchor, her rock, her constant companion. They eventually married, a small, private ceremony held at their seaside villa, surrounded by the few remaining people they trusted. It was a celebration of their love, a testament to their resilience, a symbol of their hope for a future free from fear and violence. Caterina never forgot Marco Ferrara, the man who had saved her life, the man who had shown her that even in the darkest of hearts, there could be a flicker of goodness, a spark of redemption. She visited his grave often, placing flowers on his tombstone, whispering words of gratitude, of forgiveness, of regret. Years passed. The fragile peace in Viridia held, strengthened by a shared weariness of violence, by a growing desire for stability, for a better future for the next generation. The families, while still maintaining their separate identities and territories, learned to cooperate, to negotiate, to resolve their disputes peacefully. Caterina and Dante, while living a quiet, secluded life, remained influential figures in Viridia, their wisdom sought, their advice respected. They became symbols of hope, of resilience, of the possibility of change. One evening, as they were sitting on the terrace of their villa, watching the sunset over the sea, Caterina felt a sense of peace, a sense of contentment that she hadn't thought possible. The scars of the past were still there, the memories of loss and betrayal still lingered, but they no longer defined her. She had found love, she had found purpose, she had found a measure of peace in a world that had once seemed irredeemably broken. She had built a life, not of power and violence, but of compassion and healing. Dante took her hand, his touch gentle, his eyes filled with love. "You did it, Caterina," he said. "You changed things. You made a difference." Caterina smiled, her heart filled with gratitude. She had not done it alone. She had been helped by unexpected allies, by the sacrifices of others, by the enduring power of love. She had found her way out of the darkness, guided by the ghosts of the past, and by the unwavering light of hope. The sea stretched out before them, vast and endless, a mirror of the future they had created, a future where the echoes of blood oaths and betrayals finally faded, replaced by the gentle rhythm of the waves and the promise of a new dawn. The end.